Hi, everybody. This is your co-host, Stu, and I'm here with the paranormalist, Patty Wilson. And Patty, how are you this Labor Day? It's a holiday today. How about that?
I'm doing just fine. I've had 3 days off, so I'm in a really good mood and I'm rested.
Yeah, me too. Well, I don't know about rested, but I try to get as much stuff into a weekend as we can. So folks, if you are seeing this, it's not going to be on Labor Day, obviously, but this is the day we're recording it.
Yes.
Right.
So I was doing some research on cattle mutilations, and I thought I would like to share that.
Okay.
So, cattle mutilations were something that were really a big phenomena in the 1970s, and then they really pretty much have died out. Nobody talks about it. It's rare you ever see a story about it. So I began to think, I wonder if they're still happening, and if they are, what's the frequency? So I thought we would go back and kind of start at the beginning. So in the late 1960s, there was a report of a horse, which is the first of the animals. It's not just cattle, it's
Okay.
all kinds of animals. And this horse's name was Lady. Unfortunately, when the newspapers report the following story, they called her Snippy for some reason. But the original horse's name was Lady, and if you look at the actual reports on it, you'll come up with Lady. It makes it a little confusing for somebody, so that's why I wanted to let them know. If you're looking at the story of Snippy the horse, it's actually Lady the horse. So the basic gist of the story is that Lady was a horse that was very much tame and very affectionate, and she would go out into the fields in the daytime, and she would usually come back every night, and they would take her in and give her grain and do what take care of her, brush her down, and what have you that needed to be done for her. One night she doesn't show up. This would be out west, and they're thinking, okay, that's just a little odd. By the morning she's still not there, so they begin looking for her. She's still not there that evening. And they start calling around to all the other ranches, like thinking maybe she got out somehow, something like that happened to her. They've been walking their fields and the woods beyond and what have you in case a predator took her down. Have found absolutely nothing. Day 3 comes along and they come out and they're walking around looking for her still, trying to figure out the mystery of it because nobody has seen her, and everybody in the valley pretty much knew everybody else's horses and stuff. So it wouldn't have been an easy thing for her to get lost. Somebody would have said, hey, isn't that lady that belongs to this family, and have given them a call. So they're walking around. They notice something at the far end of a pasture, and they go out toward it. Sure enough, it's this horse, and she's down. As they get closer, they are horrified to see what has happened to her. So there is a strip along her, from her nose up the side of her jaw, that has been peeled completely away, showing the bone and the teeth completely stripped. And it's perfectly clean cut incision. It is not torn or ripped. Her anus has been cored out. Her one ear was cut off, and her one eye was cleanly cored out. Obviously, she was mutilated and killed. They are horrified. They're shocked. They've never seen anything like this. So, of course, they call the police, and the police come out and they take photographs. There are, if you're interested in seeing them, there are lots of photographs of this particular event that have made the internet over the years, because there were a lot of police photographs. And the people that owned the horse also took pictures. And so they've leaked out over the years. There's a lot of cattle mutilation photographs, frankly. And it looks clean. There's no blood. Like, there's no darkening underneath the horse. There's no blood leached out from the areas that have been pared away. Nothing. It's just clean. The bone was white and the teeth were white, even though this long strip of muscle and flesh was cut away. The same with the other incisions. They're completely bloodless. So you're going to come across a few theories as we go through this, because obviously the question is, what is doing this? And There was no blood underneath of her on the ground. You know, you would see a patch of
Right, right.
darkness.
Hmm.
Nothing. This has never been explained, but that's the first of a lot of different mutilations. And they go all the way. I mean, at one point they were saying there was like 10,000 of these in the American West. 10,000 reported cases by the 1980s. That's
A lot.
extreme.
Hmm.
And actually, I found it interesting because, and I have not found any cases, but I want to say this because we are from PA. When I'm reading all this data, I keep bumping across this weird phrase. It says from the American West and Pennsylvania, there are animal mutilation cases. I cannot find a single animal mutilation case in Pennsylvania. I can find an FBI document that references one. But if there are animal mutilation cases in Pennsylvania, they are keeping them very, very well hidden. But when you read the data, I've come across 5 or 6 different articles that make note of in the Northeast, Pennsylvania is the state that has had cattle mutilations. I mean, there's a lot of states that have cattle in the Northeast. I mean, we are a rural state by nature. We have 2 great big cities on the ends, but most of us is an agricultural state. So anyhow, I just wanted to make that clear because I'm not going to do a single cattle mutilation case from Pennsylvania simply because I can't find anything substantiated, just the references to one in an FBI document from the 70s. But
Near
so
Kecksburg,
as we're going,
right?
what?
Might be
Kecksburg?
near Kecksburg. Yeah.
I don't know. It doesn't tell you where. That's the bizarre thing. Like it's always this really obscure inferences for the Pennsylvania story. Nothing else. No specifics. I'm going to give you specific cases from all around the world. So some of the things you're going to hear is animal deprivation. So like animals came in and attacked this animal, this whatever it is. It could be a cow, horse. Sheep seem to be another animal that are known to be attacked in this way. And they tore these organs out. But the fact of the matter is they're not tears. I have seen carcasses. I grew up in the woods. I've seen carcasses that have been attacked by predators and scavengers both. And they're usually ripped tears. They're ragged. They're certainly not straight cauterized looking lines, as though a heated scalpel or a laser, which are 2 implements that are often indicated as possibly being used. In one case, we're going to really talk about that. They often say, well, soft tissue will be chosen by predators or by scavengers. So I should have said in Lady the Horse's case, her tongue was also cleanly cut out. So yes, scavengers will go for like the eye tissue and the tongues and stuff like that, but they don't make a clean cut.
And there's usually clotted blood too, if I recall.
Yes, there would be clotted blood all around. There's none of that in any of these cases. This is one of the trademarks. So the trademark, it makes it different than an animal deprivation case, is that it's clean cuts, no blood, specific, usually the sex organs, the anus, the tongue, sometimes an ear, almost always an eye, and a strip of flesh along the one side of the skull, right where the teeth and the cheek would be, are gone.
I think it's safe to say use the term surgical precision.
Yes, you see that repeatedly in the police reports. You see it in veterinarian reports. And there's one case where we're going to really get into that because the one veterinarian who was actually presided over necropsies of multiple animals who have been found in this condition actually offers some information that's pretty important if you're looking at these cases. So we're going to start out with just doing some cases. I didn't pick the old cases from the 70s because I figured those are cases that are well known. There was an argument at the time that there's always been cattle and animal mutilations, that the farmers and the cattle farmers in the American Southwest and even the Northwest were having a rough time financially in the 1970s because it was a horrible time of inflation, something like what we're going through now. And they were struggling to make ends meet. They weren't able to sell their beef. And so as an offshoot of this, there was an argument made that maybe they were making this up to be able to collect on insurance policies and stuff like that. But most of these farmers do not get to collect anything. I mean, they're literally out whatever amount that cow or horse or whatever was worth. One case, there's a $7,000 loss to the farm in one night. So I honestly don't think this case, that argument holds much water. And but as we go through it, that was one of the original arguments, is that they were just reporting this stuff so that they could collect insurance policies. But if you follow through on it, most of them didn't get any kind of insurance policy collection out of it. And so most of them didn't even file. I mean, they just lost their livestock. And I have to tell you, I grew up on farms, and I will tell you that I don't know of any farmer who would be willing to do to his animals what was done to these animals. I just don't. Most farmers, believe it or not, are very attached to their animals. They spend every day with them. They know whenever they're sick, when they're off their feed, when they're limping, anything about them. So yes, they use them for milk or for meat, but they try to do so in a humane way, and they take good care of their animals. But to just torture them in a field is not something I would ever see a farmer do.
So was it determined whether these mutilations are pre or post-mortem?
They seem to be before they die. So, and there's some stories where, there's a couple stories in particular where somebody actually witnesses and or hears what's happened as it's happening. So we're going to talk out, for the first one is a 2010 case, and a guy by the name of, I hope I pronounced his last name right, his name's Chuck Sukwalski. He had been investigating the paranormal for 30 some years, a lot of UFO cases, a lot of cattle mutilation cases in his area. So in August of that year, of 2010, he gets a call from this lady named Glenda. She's from Rush, Colorado. It's a 2 or 3 hour drive for him from where he lives. And she tells him that earlier in the week, there had been a cattle mutilation on her farm, and she wants to know if he will come and take a look. She's frustrated, and you'll find out why, because really the police either have one or two attitudes: either yep, it happened, we can't do anything about it, or no, I'm pretty sure something else happened to the cow or the horse or whatever. Good luck with that. But there's really no resolution via the police. But she did what most people would do in that circumstance. She called the police and waited a couple of days while they supposedly investigated. And I'm just saying supposedly because I don't know what they did, not because I'm trying to be rude to them in any way. They may have looked into it and it's just not recorded. But she waited a couple of days. He made arrangements. Chuck made arrangements to go out. So he drove all the way up to Rush, Colorado. He gets there. Now, he calls her place a ranch, but he talks about the fact that we think of ranches as these things like you see in the TV show Dallas, 10,000 acres. Really, most of them are basically small farms of about 50 to 80 acres. They have 20 to 50 cattle on them. This is how these people make their livelihood. And they're not rich by any stretch of the imagination. They're just making ends meet. So this is what hers was like. It was about a 50 acre spread, and she had approximately 50 cattle on that spread that she was, caring for. So he gets there and he meets Glenda. As soon as he gets out of the truck, he sees her, and she looks shell-shocked, like she's really scared and upset. He can see some cows over in an area, kind of all bunched together, and they're just sort of standing there in this grazing area, not really eating. They're just sort of all there. He hears a dog barking like crazy and can't locate the dog, but it's just yipping and carrying on like it's going nuts. At first he thinks it's because he's there, but the dog continues to bark and howl. So he walks up to Glenda and they talk for a moment, and he's like, gathering up his equipment. He's got cameras and different pieces of equipment he's going to use to help in his investigation.
Right.
He gets his gloves on, he's got plastic bags and all this good stuff, and he says, she says, I wish I could have got you here, earlier. And he's like, well, I got here as soon as I could. And he starts taking his stuff out, and it had been about 4 days since she had found the animals. And she's like, I'm really glad you're here now. She talks about the police and says that, they just were not useful, is how she puts it. At that point, they talk a few seconds about how the police had told her there really wasn't anything they could do. She was a third-generation rancher, so she knew her stuff. She had grown up in this world. What she was telling him was that that thing that she had happen to her animal was like nothing that she had ever seen in her whole life. So they walk out towards a barn and a horse corral, and you can see the cattle and hear a horse inside the barn, and it's really raring and carrying on. This is really important because he said beyond the horse corral there were horses, and they were behaving oddly. They were all kind of gathered together in a little clutch. They were anxious, and the dog just continued to bark and howl and wail. And he asked her, is this the way the animals normally act? And she's like, no, they haven't gotten out of that little huddle since this happened 4 days ago. They're still really anxious. And the dog has been acting like this ever since this happened 4 days ago. That's why I have him locked in the barn. And she says, but we have a survivor. You might call him a witness. It's one of the other horses who was with the horse that was killed and mutilated. So she goes into the barn with Chuck, and the dog is going insane. He sees out in the distance that there's 2 horses laying on the ground, and he said, there's 2 of them. And she's like, yes, there were actually 3 horses out there. The other horse is the one I'm telling you about, and he's really struggling. So he goes into the barn. He sees this young male horse, about 2 years old, and the horse is terrified. It's snorting, it's rearing. And he's like, is this horse always this aggressive? And she's like, no, he's actually like our family pet. And until this happened, he's the most docile horse on the planet. He examines this horse first, and he can see a red patch about the size of a quarter. It looks like a burn on the horse's nose. Running the flashlight up and down the horse's flank and his legs, he comes across more burns on the horse's legs, all of them about the size of quarters. And he's kind of shocked. And she says, yeah, the dog's like this too. He's got those burns too. And I don't know what to do. She doesn't want to come in the house. She won't do anything. She just stays out here in the barn and just howls. So he walks from the barn with this lady, Glenda. They go out into the field. The 2 horses are out there. Their names were Princess and Buck, the horses. They're both dead, obviously died an unnatural death. They're flat against the ground on their side, laying in exactly the same position, side by side. Exactly. Almost like somebody laid them out. And you're going to find that is something that you see in a lot of these cases. If there's more than one animal dead, they're laid in a row. So he sees no signs of predators. No defensive resistance, no hoof prints, no digging in the dirt there, as though something might have pawed or reared up and tried to fight something off. They died quite suddenly. They were both young, healthy animals, each of them around $1,000 at that time. So he said that both of them had that strip of flesh missing up the side cheek, white bone. Their sex organs were missing, their tongues were missing, and their anus was carved out, and one of their eyes were missing. Now, a lot of times, critics and skeptics want to say that the animals don't have blood because it's actually pooled at the bottom of their. So we all know whenever an animal, or including a human, dies, the blood will actually pool at the lowest point. So if you're
Right.
laying on your back, it's all in your back. If you're laying on your side, it'll go to your side because it's not circulating anymore. But there was no blood, and that is not the case in this instance. There was no blood, literally. No blood along the wound lines, no blood anywhere. And there's no blood at the scene at all. There's no blood underneath them. There's no pool of blood that blackens underneath the animals. So there's nothing like this. Glenda will describe the wounds as surgical in nature. There's nothing. There's straight cuts, just like I said they would be. There's a T-like incision down the one horse's abdomen where its insides were opened up and the internal organs, sex organs, were taken out. They have no idea why. It would later be said, when it was described, that it was laser-like cuts, although there was no cauterizing, so there was no burning. So it was just a cut. She would tell him, Glenda would tell him, that when she found the horses the morning after they had died, that she could smell burning around them. And I don't know if you've ever smelled live flesh burning, but it's a horrendous stench.
Mm-hmm.
I've had the misfortune to be near a barn of young cattle that caught fire and burned up. And it is a smell you will never forget if you ever have to smell it. And it's definitely a burning smell. It's a very acidy smell. And so this is what she was describing to him. And he begins to look for other wounds. The animal that had that T cut down the abdomen, that animal, he runs his gloved hands up inside of it, and he realizes that there's notches carved into the ribs of the animal. He can feel them as he's going down. He started approximately 3 inches from the spine on each rib. They're up, starting at the skull all the way down. He could feel a straight line pattern leading all the way to the 11th rib, a notch cut out of each rib. Internally, nobody knows what happened to these animals to this day. They are marked as another, unknown death. Some people argue it was predators. Some people argue it's UFOs. Some people say it's the government. Some people have no clue. And I'm in the I have no clue category. I have no skin on in the game for any of these theories. And so but I found it fascinating. We're going to go to 2020. A cow was found dead and mutilated at the DR Land and Cattle Ranch in Hampton. The cow was basically, it was out in a field. It was discovered by the owners. There were actually 5 mutilated bulls. They were laid in a row, straight line. They've been investigated, and nobody to this day has any idea how these cattle died. Now, their genitals were missing, their udders were missing, their tongues were missing, their hearts were cut out. This was found by the foreman of the ranch. The police were called. A necropsy was done on one of the cattle. There is absolutely no idea. Also, no blood was found at the scene. There was no blood on the wounds. This is a repeating theme you're going to hear over and over. And I find it fascinating because nobody talks about this stuff, but it's still happening to this day. We're going to go on to a couple other cases real quick. There's a couple cases that I found really interesting. 5 pregnant cows, 1989, are all laid out in a straight line on a ranch owned by L.C. Wyatt. This was reported in the Little River News. The cattle had all been there unharmed 2 days earlier when he found them. They were laying in the same position, all legs up, as if they had been running and zapped by something that had flipped them over. 5 of them. The farmer would say it looks like they were dropped in their tracks. The examination of the carcasses of the animals, 3 of them had a bloodless cookie cutter oval cut out of the tissue for the rectum. Again, eyes missing, the same body parts missing, no blood. This other 2 seem to have been similar, except that they were more savagely cut to pieces. But again, reported to be a medically precise attack. It's bizarre. They would recall that the night before the cattle were discovered, that the owner had a neighbor named Jim Williamson who had seen a golden glow above the substation about 30 miles, 40 miles away. He had watched it for a while and later on called the police and report that, because he didn't know what it was, if it was like something was going to catch fire or something. It was something he had never seen before. And you can go on and on and on. There had been cows discovered in several other places having similar reports about electrical substations that suddenly had lit up, or that there had been lights in the sky. And then the cattle were found the next day. So after these 5 cattle were found, a pathologist by the name of Dr. Alshalter, who was one of the first people at the case of Lady the horse that they misnamed Snippy. This vet is the guy who took the samples from her. This is how long he's been in the field. And so he's done this many times because he became very interested in this whole thing because of having taken that case with the horse, Snippy, or Lady. It's fascinating. He cut tissue from all across her body. Again, the cattle had all the same markings, the same things were taken. He would suggest, this is the case where I wanted to talk about. He said the cutting was done quickly with a hot instrument of some kind. This was his determination. It had pinpoint accuracy and minimal dissipation of the heat of the cut lines. He suggested a laser or something known as hot needle surgery, and he said that the exposed tissue where it was cut had been exposed to temperatures as high as 300 degrees Fahrenheit. That's pretty evocative when you look at it. This is definitely not a predator. This is not a cult. In the 70s, the second best explanation was satanic cults. But I sincerely doubt that there's a bunch of hooded dudes in robes running around fields all across the world, cutting up animals in the middle of the night, and nobody's ever seen them. How this is happening, I don't know. Now, just so you can, there's a couple cases that I just thought were really interesting. So in England, there's a place called the Cannock Chase in Staffordshire, England. In 1985, there's a case of what they call an interrupted cattle mutilation. So basically the story is that there was this guy and his son. They're driving home one night. They own a farm over there. And about 8:30 in the evening, they see this great big triangle-shaped craft in the sky. They pull over. They're amazed at seeing it. They get out of the car. They're watching it. It sort of spooks them. They see these 3 big lights come out of this craft. Now it's over a field with animals in it, cattle in it. They get back in the car and they take off and get home. They call the police. The police come and take the report, but they say something that's kind of weird. They're like, "Oh, you made a mistake when you got out of the car. You should never get out of the car when you see these things." And I'm thinking, does that mean you get reports of this often, or you know something we don't know? Because it struck the man as really odd that they would scold him for that, not holy crap. There was a triangle-shaped craft in the sky with lights beaming down onto the field. Just don't get out of the car. It's a bad idea. So then a couple days later, there's a second incident where a neighbor sees the same craft hovering directly over a cow. Now it's him and 4 other friends, and they're coming back from hunting ducks. It's mid-afternoon. and they see this craft, triangular shaped craft, and it's literally hovering above one of the cows in this field. And when it senses there somehow, whenever it comes inside of there, they come inside of it, I should say, I apologize. When they come inside of it, it suddenly shoots straight up into the sky and takes off at a fast pace, leaving the cow unharmed. Is this because it didn't want them to see what it was going to do to that cow? Now, we're going to talk about a couple more cases in England. In 2010 in Shrewsbury, England.
I've been there.
Have you been to Shrewsbury?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I've been all over the UK whenever I was in Europe with the Air Force. Yeah.
All right. So then you know more about this place than I do by far. But they found corpses of sheep that had the same injuries as the cows and bulls and what have you, the facial injuries, the eyes, the sex organs, the tongues, etc. But in this instance, the sheep's entire face was peeled away. All of them. Not just that strip, but the whole face was peeled away. All the skin and all the tissue, leaving just white bone. And that's really important because it should have blood on it. And they make the...
Yeah, and if there was so let's say a scalpel, okay, so if a scalpel is going that deep, it would leave a mark on the bone. And so, yeah, it may not cut the bone, but I mean, there's going to be a mark on the bone where that happens.
And I have to tell you, I've butchered a lot of deer over the course of my lifetime, and when you are peeling meat, the tissue off of the bone, it leaves bits behind. And it's not white. It's covered in blood and bits of flesh. There's no way to unless you're scraping it, and then you'd have the marks. Now, the other thing that was interesting about this case is that they all had holes drilled in their heads, and their brains were removed. No idea why. Witnesses who saw it, they talked about this craft in the air, laser beams shooting from the craft to the field where the sheep were found. And one witness stated that they saw orange spheres in the sky above these sheep the night before they were found dead. It's amazing. Whenever the sheep's bodies were examined, it was described this way. It was like a Star Wars type technology attacked them. Also in Shrewsbury in 2011 and 2012, there was a whole spate of these mutilations. There was a horse that was killed, same type of thing. Some researchers argued that the mutilations were being carried out as part of a government experiment to test for a herpes virus that was passing through the livestock in that area. But I've never held any interest in that, because if you were going to be testing for that, you would just go to a farm and test for it, or you would buy sheep or cattle or whatever. You know, the government buys livestock all the time. They just buy random livestock and take them away, and they wouldn't be leaving bizarre evidence in the middle of people's fields. That just doesn't make any sense to me. So I never bought that theory that it's the government doing it. Now, there have been cases where the animals look like they've been dropped from a distance. We're coming down to one where they described it as being like a soft squished toy, meaning all the insides were just broken. There have been a couple instances where people have reported seeing small humanoid beings around the same area at the time that this occurred. And it's just it's a bizarre phenomena. So we're going to talk about like two more and then we're done. So there is a falling cow mutilation case in Nebraska, 2013. Guy by the name of Alex Peterson found one of his cattle dead, its head wedged into the ground, literally in the ground. When they pulled the head out, they found that there was no earth in its mouth or its nose, meaning that it wasn't alive or breathing at that time. So it had to have been mutilated and killed and then dropped from a height. We have no idea. Some people believed it was UFOs. Some people believe it's a black helicopters. You will hear stories of black helicopters in the general area of these things as well. After his first cow was found dead, he discovered 3 of his other cows had precise medical cut wounds on them. The third cow would live for a little while, but he'd have to finally anesthetize it. It was in pretty bad shape. And he had it tested for chemicals, but interestingly enough, the reports never came back.
That raises eyebrows. Yeah.
Didn't come back.
Mm-hmm.
In 2019, there's one in Sylvie's Valley in Oregon. Again, the precise body parts removed, the blood's missing, those precise injuries. And this is the one of the ones where they talk about the animal being dropped from a distance as well. So there's multiple of them. This got so bad, there were so many cattle on this farm that were killed over the course of the summer that the farm that was the rancher and his hands began to patrol at night trying to catch whoever or whatever was doing this, because they were losing a huge amount of their stock. And it's an insane story. So the last story that I want to tell was probably one of the most bizarre. This story comes from Colorado, and so a gentleman was a rancher near Mesa, Arizona, at the time that this had happened. So he and his wife had been seeing strange lights in the sky for quite a while. They would find multiple cattle mutilated over the years. They stayed on this ranch. That's all they had, really. And then after his wife died, he tried to make a go of the place. A couple years after she had passed away, one night he goes to bed early. He wakes up when there's this bright flash of light in his room. He gets out of bed, goes to the window. Now, his barnyard, his corral and what have you, is only about 40 or 50 yards away from the back of his yard. So he's, I apologize for my cat. He's yodeling.
Mm.
So anyhow, he can see his cattle clearly from his back window, his bedroom window.
Yeah.
But all he sees is this great big bright light. And he hears one of his cattle screaming. He sees it going up in the air in a blast of white light. It's hovering about 100 feet above him. He's looking up at it. Whatever's going on, this cow's bellowing. And he's so scared, he literally scrambles backward, wedges himself between the wall and the bed, and just sits there waiting for daylight. He's terrified, absolutely terrified. He can hear the cow just bellowing. And I don't know if you've ever heard cows bellow, but they're loud. And this thing's bellowing in absolute pain. There's nothing he can do about it. And then finally, it's silence. At dawn, he gets up, he grabs his clothes, runs outside, and he finds that a mutilated cow laying in the area where he had seen that craft hovering. He calls the sheriff, and the sheriff basically tells him, there's really nothing I can do. I can't tell you anything about this. It's just what it is. And these things are going on to this day. I found cases all the way up through last year that I have found reported. And I just wanted to talk about it because nobody talks about these anymore. And they're obviously they're really horrific, whatever's going on. And it seems to me we have better answers than Satanists and some crazed cult going out in the middle of a field chasing cattle down at night. Whatever's going on has some other interesting traits. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about before we end this is that these animals, and you see this with Bigfoot attacks as well, any animal that's killed by a Bigfoot, and there are stories of it, we can talk about them at another time, none of the scavengers will go near it. And in these cattle mutilation and animal mutilation cases, scavengers don't come anywhere near it. Coyotes, the birds of prey, like none of them. Even some places they'll talk about the insects won't even land on it and lay their maggots.
That's really unusual. Yeah.
It is. But it's repeatedly told all around the world. And you can trace these cases back to the 1600s if you want to. There are writings in the 1600s of lights in the sky and animals being found with some of their organs or their skin stripped away. So these cases have been happening a long, long time. It's not a 1970s phenomena. It only was written about in the 1970s. But if you want to go back, you can go back to Europe and find them in France and Scandinavian countries, in England, all the way back to the 1600s.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions when you started on this, when you said it's documented from the 70s on. What about Native Americans? Do they have tales of course, Native Americans have tales of, skinwalkers and other things like that. But I mean, if this has been happening for a long time.
I don't know of any Native American stories, but I do know that there are writings in Europe where they describe this. There's in China, there's been stories. There's all around the world. It's fascinating because it's a phenomena from all around the world.
But I don't think Native Americans, at least from what I've been educated, which may be true or not, who knows, weren't ranchers. If they, the animals that they killed and used were, wild animals. So, whether it be bison, elk, deer, whatever,
right.
So they didn't have them all collected in one spot. They didn't have them corralled.
That's true. So that would definitely be, a factor that would go into it. The other thing being that, if they just came across a random one, they would, they didn't tell stories about what did it. Maybe they didn't know. Mm-hmm. But I don't think anybody knows to this day what did it, to be frank with you. But yeah, you can find them in all around the world if you look for these cases from the earliest writings all the way up to the present.
Quite interesting. Alarming, yeah. Interesting.
It is alarming, and I will tell you what's even more alarming is when I was, and we won't go into these cases because they're just too gruesome, but while I was going through these cases, I came across a subgenre of it, which are human attacks.
Yeah, it's probably good that you didn't.
I'm not going into, because these are people's family members and stuff, and I'm not. But I did find that because that was my next, that would have been my next thought is, okay, is it just why is it just centering on animals? Is there something different about them than us? And then I stumbled across my first of about 5 that I found, human attacks, that they are attributing as being very similar to what I've described. And we'll leave it at that. But anyhow, it's an interesting topic. It's not one anybody's talking about anymore, for whatever the reason. And it should be talked about because it's definitely very mysterious. It's definitely, we don't have an answer for any of this. So why we're not looking into it, I don't know.
That's probably a reason.
Linda, there's a lady by the name of Linda Moulton Howe, who is the first lady of paranormal journalism. And she's been collecting these cases for a lifetime. You can look her up. She won all kinds of awards. She was a regular videographer, reporter, and what have you. She did a case in the 1970s on animal mutilations, and that sort of took her down this road that would eventually lead to where she's at now. Her website's called Earth Files. She doesn't need my help getting her publicity. She's a very famous woman, and rightfully so, very talented. But you will find all kinds of bizarre cases in her files if somebody's interested and wants to look further.
If I can find that, I'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, okay. It's called Earth Files. It's really, it's very popular among geeks like me.
All right then. Well, Patty, thank you very much for these alarming stories, and we want to thank our friends for watching and listening. And if you can, please click the like button, whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening to it through one of your podcasting platforms that you subscribe to. Remember, we have the Facebook page, The Paranormalist Podcast. We also have an email address, paranormalist@theparanormalistpodcast.com. Again, love to hear your stories, ideas, things like that. And unless you have something to add, I think we will close out this episode.
Nope. unless you know about the Pennsylvania cases that I can't find, if somebody does send me some information, I would be fascinated.
You're
Otherwise,
not
good
alone.
night.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
Okay.
know. It'll be interesting, won't it?
Okay. It will. Okay. Good night, Patty.
Good night.